Some team and program names in the same sentence create nostalgia, prestige, and allure like few others. And we've got the greatest cross-sectional rivalry this Saturday at the Coliseum. It's Notre Dame. It's USC. We appreciate you being here on Trojans Live right here at the Voice of College Football. And, of course, that's our guy, Matt Zemek from Trojans Wire, joining us to break it down. Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing okay. And, it's interesting. USC won, but fans were PO'd. Fans were angry during and after the game because, a Lincoln Riley offense scored just 19 points, couldn't finish drives in the red zone. And hey, like, that anger's appropriate, right? Like, it's not as though you get a medal for beating UCLA. Now, of course, like, you're supposed to beat UCLA if you're USC, if you're Lincoln Riley. But Trojans did not play well, not on offense. Defense did a fabulous job. Danton Lynn for mayor, governor, whatever. But, this offense, it's falling really short of the mark. And so the two main columns I wrote were on Lincoln Riley and also Josh Henson. And, I really don't understand the idea that this is a Lincoln Riley problem and it's not a Josh Henson problem. I mean, it's a Lincoln Riley problem to the extent that it's Lincoln Riley's show, it's Lincoln Riley's thing. But what, are we not going to say that this offensive line is falling short? Like, I don't know how you escape that. I don't know how you escape the point that when this offensive line gets into the red zone, when it gets into short yardage, gets beaten up. Lincoln Riley ran the ball on 1st and goal multiple times on 1st and goal, and those plays got stuffed. And so when people want Lincoln Riley to run the ball, which, broadly over the course of the season, over the course of a whole game, yes, he should be running the ball more. Like, when the running game's working, you stick with it. And when you have 2nd and 3, you run the ball to get a first down, to keep the clock rolling. You minimize the exposure of your defense. Certainly there are plenty of times where Lincoln Riley gets too cute, he gets too clever, he tries to throw the ball when he should be running it. Not arguing with that broader overall thesis, but when USC's gotten into short yardage and goal to go and red zone, the unit struggled. A number of USC fans have said, we're averaging 5.5 to 6 yards a carry. And, that's true, but that's an aggregate stat. And there's a difference between running the ball between the 20s and running the ball in the red zone and short yardage. And those have been two different realities for USC. If you remember the Washington game, USC repeatedly tried to sledgehammer the ball between the tackles inside the 10 against Washington and got stuffed. So broadly, yes, Lincoln Riley should be running the ball more. But folks, tell me when this offensive line has arrived at a key juncture of a close game and really stepped up, since LSU. Okay, the Wisconsin game was, really strong. Third quarter, blew the doors off the Badgers, ran away with that game, won by 17. Utah State, a cupcake game. Rutgers was an easy game. Rutgers was absolutely awful in that particular game. Nebraska was a decent game, but Trojans still failed to finish drives, right? Still had their red zone struggles. The LSU game, with the way that game finished, the offensive line brought that game home. It helped Miller Moss win that game late. That was a strong opener. And of course, it was just week 1. So you were thinking, oh, the ceiling's going to be really high for this offensive line. That didn't materialize. And, has the effort and overall performance been better against Rutgers, Washington, and Nebraska compared to Michigan, Minnesota earlier in the season? Yes, like that's true. But that's why this UCLA game to me was pretty defining. That's why this UCLA game to me said any idea that this offensive line is on a steady upward trajectory, this game shot that down. So the idea that, asking for Josh Henson's head on a platter is clickbait, come on, folks. Come on. Now, do you think that Josh Henson is the best USC can do? on the offensive line? Cards on the table. Is this the best USC can do? All right. And one of the things I mentioned in the Henson article is that if there's a candidate. Now, last week I mentioned Sam Pittman, but it seems as though he's going to be retained at Arkansas. So he might be off the table. But there's another very realistic candidate. And of course, if you're gonna say that a coach should be fired, you have to have a replacement in mind, right? And so I do, and I did in my article over the weekend at Trojans Wire. Clay McGuire, he's at Texas Tech. He is the guy who whipped the 2021 USC offensive line into shape. Now, Tim Drevno was Clay Helton's O-line coach in 2020. He failed. So Helton, as his kind of last gasp to try to get the offensive line right in 2021, and obviously Helton lasted just 2 games, but Helton's hire of Clay McGuire turned out to be pretty significant because McGuire got those guys, Andrew Voorhees, Brett Nealon, Justin Dedich, he got those guys in shape. He got those guys playing well, and Josh Henson had the benefit of inheriting them in 2022. But Clay McGuire put everything in position for that 2022 USC offensive line to work. And Clay McGuire, Texas Tech, he's coached air raid offensive lines. Now, Riley might not run a pure air raid, but, you know, they both are familiar with Mike Leach concepts. Clay McGuire worked for Leach at Washington State. There is definite familiarity. Like it's not as though Clay McGuire, if brought aboard for 2025, would be somehow starting from scratch or ground zero, as though he and Lincoln Riley would need to figure things out from the start. There would already be working knowledge, similar vocabulary, similar lexicon, jargon, what have you. Like that, to me, Clay McGuire would be an upgrade over Josh Henson. And we established, when I was doing my show with Tim, and I know that Tim's, has a different view from me, but we did both come to an agreement. 2024 was the prove it season for Josh Henson. Here we are, 6-5, had to wait until game 11 to clinch a bowl game, and we're still struggling to score, forget about 30, couldn't even score 20 against UCLA. Is that the best USC can do? And that's where we got to. That's where we arrived at with Alex Grinch a year ago. It was clear that was not the best USC could do. We were all in agreement on that. So it's strange to me to see people defending Josh Henson as though this is the best USC can do. And some people are going to point out, I know it, because I went through it this last year. Oh, but he's flipping these 4 stars, okay? I mean, and that's good. And I have said that you better at least bring in the talent and raise the ceiling. That's true. But he's not bringing in 5 stars. Okay. So just how much recruiting benefit are we getting in exchange for the coaching product on the field? And this is where we go back to, hey, remember this? Dante Williams. No. You got to keep him on staff. He's too good a recruiter. And I kept saying, if the quality of the coaching is not rising to a certain standard, then the recruiting benefit isn't worth it. And I'd like to think that on that point, I've been vindicated, that I was proved right. The secondary and the defense have been coached a heck of a lot better this year under a new regime. So on the Dante Williams front, like that reinforced my thesis that the coaching on the field has to measure up to and match the recruiting value that you're getting on the other side, okay? And so with Josh Henson, when you balance the recruiting and the coaching, like the math is not adding up. And I'm just really surprised that we can come off a 19-point showing against UCLA, should have put this game to bed a lot earlier than we did, and saying, oh, Josh Henson's fine. Josh Henson's good enough. Now, when saying that Josh Henson's good enough, as though like I'm ignoring Lincoln Riley's role in this, no, because Lincoln Riley hired Josh Henson, okay? Like Lincoln Riley's responsible for Josh Henson. So the idea that this is somehow just a Josh Henson thing, I'm not buying that. And the other thing about the Josh Henson and the offensive line is this. if we're angry primarily at Lincoln Riley for play calling, deficient play calling, and I'll say the play calling has been deficient. I'm not running away from that. I'm not ignoring that. I'm not denying that. Okay, it has been deficient. Like these fade passes on 2nd and goal, absolute tear your hair out. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that Lincoln Riley is going to the fade pass as much as he does. It's also ridiculous that Lincoln Riley did not call a game to make use of Jaden Maiava's legs, right? You have a quarterback who can run. We saw that option play on 4th and 1 against Nebraska. You know, get a big gain and make a key play in a key moment. You need to be using that. Like, what is the point of playing Jaden Maiava if you're not going to use his legs and you're not going to use his dual threat skills as something to keep the defense guessing and keep the defense off balance? So like that, yes, that's horrible play calling from Lincoln Riley. All right. And we have not seen the creativity, the cleverness, the ability to manipulate defenses nearly as much this season. Now, when he went to the bag and got a trick play, you know, it proved to be pretty decisive against UCLA, but we're not seeing that as much. All right. So yes, the play calling's been terrible, but the idea that this can somehow be seen as something independent of the offensive line, well, it's clear that Lincoln Riley doesn't trust his offensive line. Remember the Maryland game, 4th and 1, he kicks the field goal late in the game instead of trusting his offensive line to pound out that 1 yard. So if the coach isn't, the head coach and the offensive play caller is not trusting the offensive line, that is in many ways the ultimate argument for why Josh Henson has to be fired. The coach has to trust the offensive line coach, and the coach has to trust that position group to get the job done. So if that's not happening, we need to get a new guy. So on so many levels, we can be angry at Lincoln Riley for his play calling, and again, it has been deficient. But the idea that, oh, if he just ran the ball more, USC would be winning. Stop. Again, got stoned inside the 10 against Washington repeatedly, got stoned when he ran on 1st and goal here against UCLA. You can't find many instances this season of the USC offensive line getting 2 or 3 tough yards on a huge game-defining 4th down or 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2 against a stacked tackle box. Show me when that happened. Didn't happen against Michigan. Didn't happen against Minnesota. All right. Played really well against Penn State. Like that was the offensive line's best game of the year, all things considered. You can also say the LSU game. The LSU game was week 1. Penn State is a much better performance because it was the middle of the season, several weeks in, no secrets. You know, like Penn State had several weeks to plan for that game and sort out its own defensive issues. And USC still came up with a pretty good performance on the offensive line. But I'll note, in overtime of that Penn State game, the offensive line got flattened. And that's been the recurring theme, that this offensive line, it's not a bad line, but it's an inconsistent line, right? It plays well for about 2.5 quarters per game. All right, that has been the consistency within the inconsistency for this line, that USC's offensive line is good for about 2.5 quarters, but there's always at least 1 quarter where this offensive line doesn't play particularly well. And on Saturday night, it was the 1st quarter. You also had portions of the 3rd quarter as well. Not a complete game. This offensive line does not play complete games. The only ones where USC dominated from start to finish were Utah State, a cupcake, and Rutgers. And Rutgers was just absolutely atrocious. So I've covered a lot of ground, but the idea that Josh Henson isn't a significant and central part of the problem at USC, after all that we went through last year with the defensive staff, like the idea that, we knew Alex Grinch was holding this program back. How do you not arrive at the same view with Josh Henson, that he's holding this program back, that this offensive line, didn't hit its marks, didn't hit its targets this season? And the idea that, if we just ran the ball more, well, everything would be okay. That's just way too simplistic. It's a part of the story. I'm not ignoring that, but to say if Lincoln just ran the ball more, we'd be 9-1. we'd be 8-2, or I should say, 9-2, played 11 games. That's way too simplistic a take. The offensive line has to be great to merit that kind of simplicity. But this isn't 1979. This isn't student body right. We don't have an offensive line on par with 1979. And so, are we evaluating the same USC offensive line? Because that whole run the ball no matter what philosophy, that you do that when you have bone crushers up front. This is not a bone crushing, best of the best, one of the better offensive lines USC has had. You have to be at that standard to merit that kind of play calling philosophy.
So this USC offensive line goes up against what is going to be arguably the best defensive front that they face this year. Michigan would be right up there as well. So we know that the bowl game is going to be a wild card in regards to who shows up, how motivated they are, what the other team's going to look like, and all that other business. So just to be clear, 10 games in, 2 to go, regardless of what happens against Notre Dame and the bowl game, Henson's done.
To me, yes.
Yes.
I think the UCLA game sealed it. If USC had blown the doors off UCLA and had finished drives and scored a bunch of touchdowns, yeah, and Henson has a couple times in the past few weeks, he's flipped 4-star offensive linemen. And I've written that, if a recruiting gold rush is coming in, that could conceivably save Henson's job, and it that was part of my thought process in terms of, okay, if Henson can do enough heavy lifting on the trail and in the portal, and Lincoln Riley is aware that it's not just maybe, possibly, hopefully, but no, he's landing these big fish. They will come in the program. I've mentioned that it would be countervailing sufficient evidence. But again, I go back to that Dante Williams point. The quality of the coaching has to be worth the recruiting value. And to me, another game with a low point total, we just can't keep accepting this. We just can't. And I think that's really that's the Alex Grinch and also Dante Williams parallel with Josh Henson and USC.
So the season still has one game left in the regular season, but the Big Ten season is over, folks. So 4 wins and 5 losses is certainly not what most of us projected for this USC team. What is your basic takeaway, Matt, from the comparison of this USC personnel, the roster, the performance against a Big Ten schedule that we have to see and we have to point out missed the 2 best teams? There's a separation there as it stands right now. Ohio State and Oregon as the premier teams in the league, and then there being a bit of a gap that USC didn't have to deal with either one of them on the schedule. One thing that came to fruition for me, and I gave them a lot of leeway early in the season because I saw the good in the LSU game and I saw the good in the Michigan game. And I thought, well, at that point that Michigan was better than they turned out to be. And I thought LSU was better than they turned out to be. That, wow, this team is oh so close. But then once you see it week after week after week after week, then you determine, wow, this team is a middling Big Ten team. That's what they are. It looks so good at times, and you can be wowed and fooled at times by the brand and by the names and by the guy on the sideline and what it's supposed to be. But the results after 11 games and 9 in the Big Ten cannot lie when they struggle to the last play of the game against just about everyone not named Rutgers, Minnesota, Maryland, Nebraska, whoever you want to throw out there, a UCLA team that was devoid of offense, and obviously once void of offense, and once USC grabbed that lead in the fourth quarter, we saw that the USC defense was able to seal it, and UCLA really they were no threat on offense at that stage of the game, the last couple of drives trying to move the ball at all. This is at best, mid-tier Big Ten team.
That's an undeniable point. That Michigan result and that Michigan game, it feels very, very different compared to how it felt at the time. At the time, it didn't seem as though, Michigan was going to be that mediocre over the course of the whole season. Like early in the season, it seemed that, Texas blowing out Michigan in Ann Arbor, whoa, that's a high-end win. But we're all in agreement that Texas's best win in terms of the caliber of team it has beaten this season was Vanderbilt. The win at Vanderbilt was a higher quality win than the win at Michigan. So like that's how much we've reassessed the quality of that Michigan game and the quality of that Michigan team. So yeah. So in a Big Ten where Michigan has fallen well below standard and what we expect from that program, in which Iowa also fell below expectations. Other teams have struggled that were expected to do better. USC's part of that crowd in the middle, the mushy middle, that expected to do better, had a chance to be better, had a chance to be really good. And yeah, USC did not play Oregon or Ohio State. So what happens if USC plays those teams in the coming weeks? So in the coming years. So absolutely, that's a very essential point and part of this story, that it's not as though USC got knocked around by a Big Ten that had all of its big dogs barking this season. This was actually a Big Ten that was gettable. It's a Big Ten that was vulnerable enough that Kirk Cignetti and Indiana could elbow their way into the conversation. Now, if little old Indiana can elbow its way into the conversation against a more favorable Big Ten schedule, Indiana didn't have to play Oregon. Indiana didn't have to play Penn State. So why couldn't USC do it? And why shouldn't we expect USC to be able to have been better than it was this year? And one obvious point that also merits repeating, like USC's just playing one-score games left and right, win or lose. Like USC is not separating from the competition. And so does Lincoln Riley's bad play calling, and it is bad play calling, does it have a lot to do with that? Yes. But come on, guys, football 101, that when your offensive line is elite, you can call any play you want. You have a full playbook. You can dial up anything in any situation, and it's probably going to work because you have rock stars up front, right? Having the dudes up front makes everything possible. It's going to make an average play caller look good. It's going to make a good play caller look great. But Lincoln Riley, as good a history as he has in past seasons as a play caller, if the offensive line is not elite, if the offensive line can't get 2 yards in a short yardage situation or goal to go inside the 5, if the offensive line can't mash in those important moments against a stacked box, if it can't grind out the tough yards in the key situations, those high leverage moments, then you're not going to be as good a play caller, right? Like that's just elemental to football, that you can't just call plays and have a less than great. I'm not saying this is a bad line. Again, it's a decent line, but it's an inconsistent line, and it has struggled to play 60 minutes of complete high quality football. If you don't have an elite offensive line, even the best play callers are going to be limited in terms of what they do. And so that's why when we play this game of, is it the Lincoln Riley play calling or is it the offensive line? Obviously, it's some of both, but primarily the offensive line in football dictates what you're able to do, by and large, as a play caller. Now, if USC had an elite offensive line and we saw these results in terms of point production, then yes, of course it would be the play calling that would be the number one thing. But that's not the reality that I'm seeing right here.
So, Matt, you were able to clarify the point that I attempted to make, which was that USC proved that outside of a Rutgers game, that regardless of who you put on the field against them, they were going to play a one-score game. And it was going to come down to either they were going to be able to make the play or the other team was going to gift them the game and they were going to win by one score, or they were going to blow it at the end and lose by one score. But to further extend on that point, I don't think there's any question at this point in the season, Oregon and Ohio State are the two best teams in the conference, and it's not even that close. Ohio State just blew the doors off Indiana, those are the two best teams in the conference, and they might be the two best teams in the country, and USC did not have to deal with them. Then you've got Indiana, who I'm not saying that USC would not be capable on their best day of beating Indiana. They are, from a talent perspective, but the way the two teams played this year, if USC couldn't handle Minnesota and Maryland, et cetera, Indiana would win that game. Okay, to your point, not just for the offensive line, but for the entire team, their best day was against Penn State. That's a really strong effort to take them to overtime. Couldn't get it done, but still took Penn State. I know they're number 4 in the country. They're probably more like one of the top 10 teams in the country. Took them to overtime, outplayed them. But Illinois and Iowa, and I'm not just going by the standings, they probably are the next 2 teams in the Big Ten in regards to quality. USC didn't have to play them. So USC got a pretty good run of teams at the lower end of the Big Ten. They didn't have to deal with 3 of the top 4. They didn't have to deal with 5 of the top 7 in the conference, and they still went 4-5.
That's right, and they weren't separating. And I think that point about not separating, Mark, I'm not really talking about the standings, though that's true, but it's more about, folks, we remember the Pete Carroll era, all right? We remember how USC, it might struggle at times, but it would at some point bring down the hammer, right? And this is what all great teams do. They go click-clack, boot on the throat, they knock you out, they land that roundhouse punch, they leave no doubt. That's the Ryan Day is fond of saying that. Leave no doubt. And we know what great teams look like when they do that. And the fact that USC doesn't land those knockout blows, like, the Wisconsin second half is the exception that proves the rule. Like, that was a great second half. USC poured it on. Like, it started out of the blocks early in the third quarter like a freight train, just kept going. Like, that looked like a team that was ready to do something. And of course, that's the game in which Eric Gentry got injured. But that's kind of a digression, because this defense has actually remained good. Allowed just 13 points to UCLA. Like, that's another part of this conversation. The defense is doing its job. Allowed 13 to UCLA, allowed 13 to Nebraska. Remember, Nebraska scored 20, but 7 were on a pick 6. So USC's defense, even despite being a walking mash unit with so many important players unavailable, has been great the past 2 weeks. And still, USC has not been able to separate. USC has not been able to have one of those click-clack 21-point quarters, just the avalanche that, at some point you knew when a Pete Carroll USC team, most weeks, that avalanche was going to come at some point. This USC team, there's no avalanches, and again, Wisconsin being the exception that proves the rule. And you forge those kinds of in-game tsunamis with an offensive line that just takes over, grabs hold of a game, doesn't let go. Is play calling part of that? Yes, but it starts with the dominance up front. And at USC, we should understand that, because we remember, not just during Pete Carroll, but under the late John Robinson, under John McKay, that USC had offensive lines which would just punch you in the teeth, and they would just beat you down, beat you up, and they would take over. This offensive line doesn't take over. And you can say that, well, it was a young offensive line, and they're growing into it, and in 2025, they could be better. We had Caleb Williams in 2022, and we had a really good offensive line in front of him. And that year was the year that Lincoln Riley more or less reached the USC standard. You had dudes throughout that offense. You had the offensive line. You had the quality of quarterback. Jaden Mayava could be really special. We saw in the touchdown play that he made against UCLA. We saw, with some of the option plays that he ran against Nebraska. We've seen the extra dimensions that he does bring to the table. And you give him a bowl game and you give him a full off season, yes, like he could definitely raise the ceiling. But he will need an offensive line to be as good as that 2022 group, right? He will need an offensive line to be better than what we've seen. And do you just say, well, Josh Henson's going to get it right? I feel confident. I feel fine. Okay. If you express confidence in Henson on that level to that extent, I mean, go ahead. But like, I wouldn't, like, if I'm an AD or if I'm a head coach and I'm looking at my whole program, I'm saying, I can't just hope, right? I can't just, hope that my offensive line coach is going to do well. Like, Lincoln Riley was wishing and hoping that Alex Grinch would get it right in 2023 after the Cotton Bowl, after the way the 2022 season ended. If you're a professional at your job, the job of being a head coach, the job of being the overseer of a football program, it's not your job to hope. It's your job to insist. It's your job to make sure that the standard is attained and then maintained. And I don't see it with Josh Henson. All right. The one group that did really, really well under his watch was a group that Clay McGuire coached up in 2021 and built into a line that was ready-made to perform. And we go through this all the time in coaching. Are you coaching up? Are you succeeding with the players you have coached, that you have developed, that you have brought into the program? Or was your only success with players that you inherited? This is pretty clear, folks. Josh Henson succeeded with players he inherited, and he hasn't yet succeeded with guys that he brought into the program and cultivated. So, like, that's just so elemental and central to this business, and it's just another reason why, to me, it's a very clear-cut decision for Lincoln Riley to make.
Yeah, I was going to address a comment. I can't find it anymore, but there was a bit of a moronic, clownish comment from Alan, who basically said that these guys hate USC. Okay. I don't care if USC wins or loses myself. I am here to commentate on college football. We build a network. We watch all the games. We evaluate everyone. And I'm speaking for myself, not for Matt. And therefore, I'm a guy that picked USC to go 8-4 overall and to go 6-3 in this conference. And I even disclaimed that to say if I was going to go on either side of that 8-4, I would have gone to the upside to 9-3. So we are commenting on a team that lost 5 of 9 games in the Big Ten. They did not play, as we just pointed out, the 2 clearly best teams in the conference, 3 of the top 4 clearly best teams in the conference, and 5 of the top 7 teams in the conference still lost 5 out of 9 games and still could not separate from anyone outside of a fourth quarter against Wisconsin, and they did blow out Rutgers. And so this is the evaluation that's pretty clear for anyone who's got half of a football brain and has watched this team play. And yes, I watched them play. Do I watch every play of every game? No, I did not see them play Utah State. And I don't know, outside of that, I pretty much did watch USC play all these games. So yeah, that's an unfair, clownish, dumb statement to make just because somebody's upset about their football team not being very good. And I thought this was a really good football team entering this season. I thought that the transition to the Big Ten would be somewhat difficult, but I will stand by another statement that I made entering this season because I think we saw it against LSU. And for as uneven as LSU is, they still have exceptional athletes in spots, and they still can give a lot of teams like the likes of South Carolina and others problems and win games. And against Penn State, as we mentioned, number 4 ranked in the country, that when this team can elevate, when they can block up front and they have the skill on offense in particular, and D'Anton Lynn has done a remarkable job with the defense, that they can elevate and be in a really good team. They're not an elite team even on their best day, but they're a really good team. They're a top 15 team in the country when they play their best. But that was rare. And most of the time, they're a top 40 team in the country. And that's what they are. And that's what the results and the performance on the field has proven. And so my statement leading into the season was 8-4, 6-3, because while I felt this team was certainly better than Nebraska, Wisconsin, Maryland, Minnesota, all those. But once I started to look at that schedule and see, oh, once they hit those teams every week and some very physical football teams, I'm expecting they're going to get knocked off a couple times. And it went way beyond that, of course, that this would be the highest ceiling, lowest floor team in the conference. And when you look at the unevenness of their performances, I think that pretty much came to roost.
I mean, it's. I don't see how you argue against that overall thesis. And one of the reasons why USC is at this point is that the consistency hasn't been there. I mean, that's one of the basic hallmarks of being a really, really good team, if not a great team, versus a mediocre team, and that's what USC is. I mean, USC, we can play this game all day long. Just a couple plays here, a couple plays there. Could be 9-2, could be 10-1. So many teams can play that game. So many teams can do that. So many teams can say that. And I can't speak for the rest of the fan base, but I know I'm not interested in that. Like, I didn't want Lincoln Riley saying after the Michigan and Minnesota games, oh, we're so close. Oh, we could be undefeated if just for a couple plays. Like, that's something that losers say, right? And so I'm not interested in coming close. You don't get medals for, again, USC won most of the snaps against UCLA. USC controlled most of that game. USC had far better field position throughout the game. USC had all those trips into the red zone during the game. Like, USC did outplay UCLA, but it didn't translate into separation on the scoreboard. And when it keeps happening week after week after week, we have to say, all right, yes, the head coach is not doing his job as well as he can, but where are the guys taking over games? And the idea that, oh, if we just ran the ball more, well, USC ran the ball in multiple times inside the 10 against both Washington and UCLA, and that did not work out. That was not successful. USC got stoned on those plays. And when we consider, here's the other thing about play calling, right? Fans get into run versus pass. And obviously there's a lot of relevance to that. And there are certain plays, certain situations when, yes, you should be running the ball instead of passing. Lincoln Riley throws the ball way too often in specific situations when he should run. There's no question about that. I'm not arguing against that. But to me, the bigger issue, if we want to have the discussion about Lincoln Riley play calling, is that, just because you're calling a running play, that doesn't necessarily mean you're being conservative. Just because you're calling a pass play, that doesn't mean you're being hyper aggressive. There are aggressive runs. There are safe passes. It's not just whether you run or throw. It's how you run. It's how you throw. And that, to me, is where Lincoln Riley's true failure has emerged for USC as a play caller. He's been so much more dynamic. He's been so much more willing to stretch defenses horizontally to make them account for the whole width of the field. This refusal to have Jaden Mayava run option plays and get him on the move. How many times has Lincoln Riley called a rollout pass this year? And not just for Mayava, but also for Miller Moss, to kind of change the defense's pursuit angle instead of just keeping the quarterback chained in the middle of the pocket. There's just not been a lot of variety from Lincoln Riley. And to an extent, that's a run-pass issue, but it's also just what kind of runs, what kind of passes. I haven't seen Lincoln Riley do the kinds of things that get a defense off balance. And when you think of that, that's really what a play caller is supposed to do. A play caller, offense or defense, is supposed to keep the other side guessing. He's supposed to be a little bit unpredictable. And sometimes that means, you do run the ball on 3rd and 4, 3rd and 5. That doesn't necessarily mean that, you should do that regularly as a matter of course, but once in a while you have to do that. If they are a defense is sitting back, yeah, you run the ball on like a 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6. And sometimes, you'll throw the ball in a non-traditional passing situation. But the larger point is getting a defense off balance, getting the defense to be confused and unsure of what to expect. And I look at the Nebraska game in particular in light of this particular point. USC did a lot of conventional drop back passing in the first quarter of that game. Maava threw a couple deep balls against the Nebraska defense. Those deep shots didn't work. And the running game eventually got going in the second quarter and in the middle portion of that game. But the play that unlocked USC's offense in that game against Nebraska, if you're watching closely, was a screen pass. It was a screen pass where Maava looked to his right, then threw to his left. And that play got Nebraska's defense on its heels. It neutralized the pass rush. It got Nebraska overthinking. And then USC came with the sledgehammer between the tackles. Woody Marks was able to really get going. But it was a screen pass that changed the tenor of that game, changed the dynamic of that game for the USC offense. Now, technically, it was a passing play, but in many ways, a screen pass is just an extended handoff. So it was a running play in spirit, but it was technically in the stat book a passing play. So when we go through, USC's averaging a certain amount of yards per carry, and USC has these stats running and these stats passing, that isn't fully captured by the specific types of plays that Lincoln Riley is using. And when Lincoln Riley gets creative with misdirection and changing defensive pursuit angles and manipulating the width and the length of the field, he can still do a really good job. I mean, there was the 91-yard drive against Minnesota. I think it was 12 plays, 7.5 minutes. Like, there were lots of highlights this season in which the play calling all came together. But the play calling, like the offensive line, has been inconsistent. And Lincoln Riley's failure, the idea that just running the ball more is the whole solution, it is part of the solution. I'm not arguing against that. But the idea that, he just needed to run the ball more, and that's it, as though there isn't any other nuance involved. Yeah, I can't go in for that. Like, that's too easy. It's too simplistic, and it doesn't reflect that deeper debate. It's not so much about run versus pass. It's how you're running. It's how you're throwing. Like, I'm not upset that Lincoln Riley threw the ball on second and goal against UCLA. I'm upset that he threw a fade pass. Like, I hate the fade. It's a low percentage play. It takes the ball out of Maava's hands. Like, you're not giving Maava a chance to roll out, scramble, make an improvisational play, which he's really good at. Like, that's how USC scored the winning touchdown in that UCLA game. So can we just focus less on just raw run versus pass and more on what kind of passing play, what kind of running play? That would be the much more productive debate. And I think you could really get somewhere. But I will say, Lincoln Riley's play selection, being as constrained and limited as it has been this season, again, that reflects a lack of faith and trust in the offensive line. And we cannot have that. No football team can have a situation in which the head coach, who doubles as the offensive play caller, does not trust his offensive line. So whether Henson stays or goes, we can all agree that lack of trust cannot persist into 2025. That will mark the end of Lincoln Riley's tenure at USC 1 year from now.
Disputed National Champions is a book I've just released here on Amazon, and check it out. We've gotten a lot of favorable reviews, both online and from people just firsthand that have called up and said, Mark, I got the book, love it. Basically, we have gone through every season of the 1990s and dissected that season top to bottom in regards to the narratives, the players, the teams, what was expected, the turning points of the season, the postseason matchups, how that played out, the vote at the end of the year in regards to the polls, who got screwed, who got left out, so forth and so on, the impact of the season historically, and the trajectory of these teams and these players and the coaches going forward. And then, no, this is not just a history book. We took each one of these seasons and we plugged it into the BCS formula, into the 4-team college football playoff, the 12-team, and now we've got a proposed 14-team playoff. So we did that as well, just to see how fun would it be to see these seasons and how they would have played out in the different eras. I chose this particular decade because to me, it's the most impactful in regards to shaping where we stand now in how we determine a champion in this great sport. So give it a look on Amazon. The link is in the description section of this video, Disputed National Champions. All right, now we've got a Notre Dame team coming to town, and of course, USC could partially make its season. Even if they win this game, of course, it's still a disappointment at 7-5, but you knock off a team and the arch rival, whether that's UCLA and Notre Dame. Of course, we could have that argument all off season, but Notre Dame being, again, the greatest cross-sectional rivalry in the landscape of college football, without question. And Notre Dame comes in vying for a college football playoff spot. We discussed this game back in the offseason, Matt, as being a possible playoff game, elimination game for both teams. Unfortunately, USC did not hold up its end of the bargain. And just in time, we got our buddy Nick Shepkowski checking in from Notre Dame SI. Nick, how you doing?
Hey, guys. Hey, Mark. Hey, Matt. Good to see you guys. How you doing?
Doing well. Good to see you as well.
Nick, I need to call you Dad because Notre Dame just owned USC on Saturday and is probably heading for a 2 for this coming Saturday. So, hi, Dad.
That's the plan. That's the hope. I mean, I thought Notre Dame's women's basketball team was being a little undersold going into the year, thinking all the hype that, I mean, obviously you're going to get plenty of hype for UConn, always, Texas, South Carolina, what they've done. And it's like, yeah, Notre Dame, maybe they're a step down. I'm like, I got the best backcourt in the country, and it's not particularly close. And hopefully what happened Saturday afternoon in Los Angeles happens again Saturday afternoon in Los Angeles.
So I'll get us started here, and then I'll turn it over to Matt. So obviously, you've heard the name of a certain MAC school probably way more than you would like to hear that. So I won't necessarily need to say the full name, but NIU, of course, went into South Bend. And so as soon as that happened, much of college football nation wrote off Notre Dame and thought, okay, they may still be good, but there's no way they can make a playoff. And that's the most embarrassing loss in history and so forth and so on. But then they just started winning games after that. And most of those games could be discounted to some degree. But now when you start to win this many games, in this dominant of fashion, and you had the likes of Navy being a quality team at its level, Army being a better version of Navy, being a much more dominant coming into the game, Navy version of Navy, and just, again, the game control, the dominance has been there week to week. Your thoughts about how good Notre Dame is and how much they've developed?
I think the thing with Notre Dame is, it's kind of like if you watch Ohio State closely, in that Ohio State, yeah, we're used to the Ohio State teams that can and at times will put up 45, 52 points a night. And it's like, holy cow, they can strike so fast. They can do so many things. But what makes Ohio State great is a great defense that just suffocates you. And it's not always the most exciting thing to watch, where you're not seeing Riley Leonard going and throwing for 300 yards, 400 yards. I think his top performance this year is about 225 yards in any given game. So it's not like they're throwing the ball all over the place. It's not like usually they're starting particularly fast either. Now, that game against Army the other night was kind of the exception of this winning streak, in that they get a 3-and-out, go and score, block a punt, go and score. You blink, it's 14-0. Knowing how Army operates, that game was pretty much over at that point. And so with Notre Dame a lot in this winning streak, you look at the final scores and you see 49-7, 40-7, in these dominating performances. But there are kind of those slower starts where the defense is on fire, forcing 3-and-outs, forcing turnovers. But the offense is a little bit slower to get going. And then all of a sudden you look up and it's like, oh my gosh, what happened? It's 35-7, and this thing's over with 5 minutes into the third quarter. It's a defense that just, I mean, I would say since about 91, 92 is when I started watching Notre Dame closely, and it's as good as any that there's been since then, at least on this team.
So, Nick, most of our conversation tonight on our show before you came in was, are USC's failures more about Lincoln Riley as a play caller or USC's offensive line not measuring up. Now, I've planted my flag. I think, like Lincoln Riley's play calling has not been acceptable. It hasn't been good enough. But this is not a takeover, skull-crushing offensive line for USC, a line that can take a hold of a game. Once it gets a foothold, it doesn't let go. It keeps the boot on the throat. So I'm thinking that Notre Dame's number one point of emphasis, our defensive line, USC's offensive line, we should be able to win that matchup. And if we win that matchup, there's no path to victory for USC. Is that fundamentally where you are, or do you see any other point as being more primary, more central to the outcome on Saturday?
I mean, I think that tells you everything about USC here the last 2 years. Lincoln Riley's first year at USC, that was one of the better lines in college football. And if you remember, yes, Caleb Williams wins the Heisman Trophy, but especially in the Notre Dame game, he made phenomenal plays. I'm not trying to sell that short in any way. What won that game for USC against Notre Dame 2 years ago was USC ran the ball at will. They can't do that this year from what I've seen. And what Notre Dame does with Al Golden as defensive coordinator, I don't have the actual percentages in front of me. I'm sure Pro Football Focus or another outlet that does the advanced stats has it. I have trouble believing that Notre Dame is not in about the top 5% of sending pressure. He brings pressure, and he gets creative in doing so. And if it's run-oriented, if it's pass-oriented, disguises it extremely well. I think it kind of reflects last year's game between these two teams a little bit as well, where after the game you heard Caleb Williams, you heard Lincoln Riley say, well, that looks like an NFL defense, not because of the talent, but because of the schemes that it's running. And for the most part, linebackers are a little bit younger on this team. We have a very veteran defensive line. You have a very veteran secondary. And it's like they've been calling it Golden 3.0. Is what Notre Dame's defense has been, because it's not just that Al Golden's in his third year at Notre Dame. So many of these key parts of this defense are in this third year, and you're really seeing it become like essentially an advanced course. But I think it all starts up front. I mean, I think you nailed it. Like if USC is going to let's face it, this USC team is not one that's going to light up the scoreboard and outscore you 45-42, especially like a team like Notre Dame. So what USC is going to have to take some time off the clock, I would assume, would be part of the game plan. Are they able to do that? I mean, this is – when I think of USC, yeah, the great running backs come to mind, but, man, Tony Baselli, Bruce Matthews, like you have Hall of Fame offensive line, Tony Munoz, like Hall of Fame offensive line after Hall of Fame offensive line. And when I was watching the UCLA and the USC game the other night, it's like, all right, when's the varsity guys playing? Because it just did not look the part. If you look Big Ten football in this country, like it did not look the part whatsoever. And that until that gets fixed, like the USC thing, look at all their great teams in front of every one of those great running backs or great quarterbacks was a very good offensive line. And this is, from my observation, thousands of miles away in the Midwest, this is nowhere near that.
So I think, if there is an optimistic angle for USC in this game, and I will confess, I'm not optimistic, but if you were to put forth the argument for USC in this game, I think it's this. The Lincoln Riley kept his cards very close to the vest. It was actually a very conservative game plan against UCLA. One of the things I talked about before you came on in the show and talking about Lincoln Riley's, very unsatisfactory play selection. He's not stretching defenses horizontally. We're not seeing as much of the, toys in the fun house. We've seen him just be so much more creative and expressive and expansive in the plays that he uses. It's interesting that a trick play is what, helped USC get the winning touchdown against UCLA, but we haven't seen him go into the grab bag as much. The thought process is, and a few people in the chat watching here at the Voice of College Football have mentioned this, he's saving the really good stuff for Maava and the RPO game and the option plays for Notre Dame. He felt like UCLA's offense sucks. We can win this game without having to show too much of what we do. And Notre Dame, that's going to be the game where we lay it all out on the table. What do you think of that? How concerned are you about that?
I mean, I guess it's something you always have to wonder about, but I mean, he had to go to the trick bag in order to win the thing. He couldn't. If any of those drives in the first half result in a touchdown instead of a field goal, you're looking at a different setup. And it's like, well, you don't have to get that creative. Just figure out something. I look at it and the down the field stuff, not so much of the short RPOs, but the down the field stuff, like that goes back to the offensive line. You can't throw the ball downfield if you can't keep your quarterback upright. And it's going to be more of that again this Saturday. Like Notre Dame, like I said, Al Golden loves bringing pressure, and that's what he's done. He did it against Texas A&M, that defense did, and had phenomenal results in that game. I mean, you go back and you look at the Northern Illinois game, it's not like they were being able to drop back and throw the ball downfield. It was a deflected freak pass that broke off for 86 yards that changed the entire direction of that game. Kind of a freakish play. And otherwise, Northern Illinois wasn't throwing the ball. Like this is, I guess it's possible, but I wouldn't be thinking that this is where you're going to bust out and all of a sudden, I'm going to start chucking the ball downfield, because this is a defense that really does not let that happen. And I would think would be the key point emphasis is trying to prevent that from happening yet another week in a row.
USC has faced a lot of mediocre quarterbacks over the course of the season. And you could say quarterbacks that might have talent, but like they didn't put their best foot forward against USC, even if they had some upside. Dylan Raiola didn't play well. Will Rogers of Washington didn't play well. So now we enter the Riley Leonard part of the conversation. And, Notre Dame has not played, ferocious, fearsome defenses. I mean, Notre Dame, it was able to just grind the academies into dust, the strength advantage up front. That was pretty apparent. But, Riley Leonard has certainly evolved after his rough month of September. What's been the journey with Riley Leonard, seeing his progression? Like, did you arrive at a moment, Nick, when you felt, you know what, this guy is it. This is the guy. Or are you not there yet? Like, do you need to see Riley Leonard own this moment against USC in the Coliseum to say, now that's going to stamp him as a really good Notre Dame quarterback? Just where have you been and where are you now in terms of evaluating Riley Leonard at Notre Dame?
Sure. So I think in order to tell the Riley Leonard story, at least through this year, you actually have to go back all the way to last season, where Notre Dame gets by Duke on the last play of the game. Howard Cross III sacks Riley Leonard. Leonard injures his ankle on that play, goes off on crutches, comes back a couple of weeks later when Duke's playing Florida State, tries to gut it out in that game, ends up, he either has Duke in the lead or has them very close, but just cannot go in the second half of that game, ends up missing the rest of the season afterwards in that, and then enters the transfer portal, comes to Notre Dame. It was a injury to his ankle that he had to have repaired while at Duke still. Got that taken care of. Well, when they got in there and some of the swelling went down, it turned out that some of the screws that they put in needed to be resized because of some of the big damage that was done. Very convenient time for that to happen, of course, during spring football. So the first couple of weeks of spring football, is out for all of spring after that. So the times where you're getting those valuable reps of new quarterback, new team, new offense, new offensive coordinator, that wasn't able to take place early on in March, in April, when everyone else is doing so, because the reps are going to the backup Steve Angeli. The reps are going to the backup in CJ Carr and Kenny Mitchell at quarterback, and Riley Leonard sitting there and he's scooting around and he's got a cast on his foot or a walking boot on his foot after getting the cleanups done. So I think that's a very key part of it, because when this offense got going at the start of the year, the signs of it struggling were mightyful. The passing game was not good. And Notre Dame's gotten better at receiver, but there's still not anything, I wouldn't say anything special at receiver. But you look at Riley Leonard, and when you realized this guy's not a thrower, he's not a guy that's going to go, and a game plan's never going to be for Riley Leonard to go throw 30 passes and win you a game. But what it's going to be is when you combine him in a backfield that has, I think, it's right there with any in the country in terms of talent, with Jeremiah Love that can bust off a big play. We've seen it, saw it against Texas A&M, saw it against as recently as this week against Army. He scored a rushing touchdown in every game so far this year. And then you complement that with Jadarian Price, which is not the same breakaway speed, but still some of that breakaway speed. And he's 2 years removed from an Achilles injury. So he's really kind of finding himself at the collegiate level now once he's gotten healed and gotten recovered there. And then you factor in Leonard, where Leonard, all right, he's not this as a passer. He's not amazing as a passer. And it's the weirdest thing, because I'm not sure how much you guys have been able to, I get it. You don't watch Notre Dame up close week in and week out. But watching Riley Leonard it's interesting, because at no point you look and you watch and you're like, okay, he's kind of, all right, he's on the run. He never looks like he's moving fast. It's never like, wow, he's blazing quick. But he's got these strides of like Usain Bolt in a way, where his stride is so big and he covers so much ground when he does move his legs. Here's all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, he ran away from a corner. All right, this turned and 7-yard gain turned into 17 yards. And it just continues to happen. And so when you accept what Riley Leonard is, and you don't try to paint him and think he's going to be something else, which I think some Notre Dame fans are still having an issue with, of, well, get the guy that can throw more. Well, he might be able to throw more, the backup in Steve Angeli, but he doesn't run this particular offense nearly as well. The throwing dynamic, what it takes away from the running dynamic, is clearly not worth it, because this is one of the best running teams in all the nation. And Riley Leonard, as a runner, I think that has evolved. His shoulder injury that was suffered against Northern Illinois, when late in that game, he did not run the ball for the last quarter and a half because of his shoulder injury, and that's healed. And there's been no signs, no flare-up since then. And that's where this offense is really, between the growth of getting to just reps together, healthiness, and then better understanding what the expectation is. That's where this offense is taken off. That kind of answers the Leonard part and this offense as a whole.
All right, so now you're going to go up against a D'Anton Lynn USC defense. No more Alex Grinch fun times for any of USC opponent. And
I miss those days.
Yeah. I mean, and we're tearing our hair out at USC for an obvious reason, Nick, that if we had a D'Anton Lynn defense and the Caleb Williams offense, probably would have been playing for a national championship. But we never got to see that marriage occur. But now you're going up against a D'Anton Lynn defense, which, USC's had a lot of players missing, important players, Eric Gentry, Anthony Lucas. We can go on down the list. The defense has allowed just 13 points the last few weeks, but Nebraska's offense is not very good. Of course, don't tell that to Wisconsin. And UCLA's offense is not very good. So, how do you assess USC's defense? And, you've already mentioned this, that Notre Dame's going to run the ball. It's going to use Riley Leonard as a runner. Is it as simple as bludgeoning USC's defensive line and wearing them down? Is there a chess piece or like a chess move that goes beyond just the Irish sledgehammer this weekend?
Yeah, I think it's another part that's kind of come with that is Mitchell Evans, the tight end. I mean, you talk about Notre Dame, you talk about what always comes up: dominant offensive lines and some of the best tight ends in college football. Guess what you have this year? You had an inexperienced line at the start of the year that all of a sudden, despite only going into the year with 6 combined starts amongst the starters in week 1 against Texas A&M, they're in the semifinalists for the Joe Moore Award as one of those 10 teams. And that's all based off of guys that had not played at the collegiate level for the most part going into the year. So you have that. And you also have Mitchell Evans combined with Cooper Flanagan as well at tight end, a couple of the guys there, Eli Raridan as well, that you continue to get that production out of tight ends for Notre Dame. It's like rinse, repeat, same thing year after year after year. It just so happens in this case that with that part of it, I don't know. You look at the numbers, and I don't know if people understand how good like Jeremiah Love is as a running back, because like in the Army game, for instance, He only gets 9 touches in that game, 8 carries, 1 reception. 3 of those 9 touches went for touchdowns. And then it was a route, decided, okay, well, go up, 35-7 in the third quarter off of a 68-yard run by him, and decide, all right, think he's good for the night. Go rest up. Got USC next week. That's going to be a tough one. But that's been a large case of this year, is that you look at his touches and it's like 12 touches, 13 touches, 11. So his numbers don't jump off the sheet at you like, oh my God, that's a Heisman contender, or that's an All-American, or this or that. But his like big play percentage is right there with any probably player in the country. So that's, I feel like it's like a cheap way of being like, okay, yeah, the starting running back is a key player in this game. But I think largely when you just kind of look at Notre Dame statistically and you look at some of the numbers from Jeremiah Love, you think, okay, well, all right, I guess he might have home run speed or something, but it's just that they have a plethora of running backs. And what I think has been very key here the last couple of weeks, really the back half of the season, is they've been able to rotate backs. You haven't had to have that load back by the time November comes around that is completely worn down and beat up. There's fresh legs a lot in that backfield as well. So I kind of look at that. Jeremiah Love is a big-time playmaker, even though he might not get the same media attention as some of the other stars in the offensive side of the ball in college football. And then for me, it's Mitchell Evans, who tore his ACL midway through last season. He's kind of at that point where you saw him really after the first bye week, and then they came back and played Stanford. That's where he really started to take a step. And it seems like he's almost gotten healthier and more confident in that knee that's been repaired and rehabbed week by week with that. And he's become a bigger part of the offense each week since.
Now, Notre Dame started this season winning at Texas A&M, and a number of the teams on the schedule, you're well aware of this, were posed what seemed to be before the season a significant threat, but it didn't necessarily pan out that way. The Louisville game, to me, was a game that, like, I was thinking that was going to be a meeting on the mountaintop. Of course, we remember that Louisville gave Notre Dame problems the year before. Is there a game that where you said or you felt that Notre Dame turned the corner, that Notre Dame really grew in your estimation, or is this USC game the biggest game in terms of caliber of opponent, raw talent on the opposing side of the ball since the A&M game? How do you get at that particular tension point?
I kind of look at it and I think it's probably the Louisville game, because I mean, this is talk about a confusing college football year. That's one of the most confusing teams that there is. Go out and sure, they lose at Notre Dame. They play Miami very close at home. They go and they end up just beating the daylights out of Clemson at night, which just does not happen. Like, you look historically under Dabo Swinney in the last 10 years, that just does not occur. And they handed it to Clemson in that game. And then they go on the road to Stanford and lose in some of the most epic fashion of a game you're ever going to see. It's just, in an absolutely crazy year, that is one of the most roller coaster rides if you're following that Louisville team. But to kind of that Notre Dame Louisville game back in was it late September, early October? Now I'm forgetting. End of September. With that game, started off weird. Notre Dame set to receive. They botched the opening kickoff, fumbled, give that away. Louisville gets a short field. They score a touchdown right away. And you're thinking, oh my goodness, like, here we go. Freakish play, just like kind of at the start of that Northern Illinois game. What's going to happen? And then it's forced turnovers, quick touchdowns. You blink, it's 21-7. Notre Dame's in favor of that game. It ends up being only a 1-touchdown game, and Louisville technically had a chance at the end. One of those, Hail Marys hopefully turn into the oop-de-oop and whatever else. Lateral thing was kind of their plan there at the end once they got within one score. But when you look at the game control, like, Notre Dame was up 2 scores in that game for a good 40 minutes in it. And it was playing to control that lead, not, light up the scoreboard and have the style points, so to say. And they dominated that game in that sense, even if the statistics kind of sit there and say, yeah, but Louisville, they were only 7 points away and this and that. So I think that was a turning point. I think it built a lot of confidence. And it also showed, it almost feels in a way like that USC team. I think Trojans fans will be familiar with it 2 years ago, where in Lincoln Riley's first year, One, they didn't turn the ball over. And two, that defense, it might have given up yards and gotten in some shootouts, but it turned the other team over. It was very good at being able to create turnovers. And I know that some of the stat heads out there will get, oh, you can't predict I get you can't predict them, but you consistently pressure a quarterback. You have good DBs that are very good in coverage. I'm just going to guess your turnover numbers are usually higher than other teams that don't possess those things. Notre Dame happens to have those. And I think that really started to turn its head and really started to be on display in that game against Louisville.
Just any other things that you have in mind as like you've circled these things as keys to the game, matchups, plot points that we haven't yet discussed. It's basically, giving you the floor for any other things you wanted to be sure to say either about this game, about the rivalry, anything.
Well, I mean, I've talked to you about this before, Matt, and I'm sure it's come up with you before as well, Mark, is that, all right, it's another case this year. Notre Dame's playing for a college football playoff spot, potentially, likely a home game in that sense. USC is not playing for that. And it's really since the late 80s when you had that 88 game. Sure, you had 88 and 89 were kind of highly ranked. You had flashes here, 95, 2005, 2006, but the consistency of these teams both playing for something big. You had the Carroll years where USC was dominant, absolute, not just winning in this series, but winning like by 25 plus points on an annual basis in this series. You had the Brian Kelly era at Notre Dame where USC was down a bit and he never really got the full-fledged Notre Dame USC thing and got on his way and got out of town before he faced a USC team that was consistently competing for anything major. So it's like the rivalry has been down, but you look at this and you look at like the history of college football. All right, it might be more fierce when Michigan and Ohio State strap up. There might be more neighbor hatred when Auburn and Alabama get together. I get that, okay? You're in each other's backyards. This one doesn't possess that. What this one possesses, the most NFL draft picks of any rivalry that you're going to find, the most All-Americans, the most college football Hall of Famers, the most NFL Hall of Famers. You can't tell the history of college football without very quickly getting to the Notre Dame-USC rivalry and how important these two were in the history of building each other up. That when that series was put together, Michigan and Fielding Yost can't go play those damn Catholics. Nope, can't do anything with the Catholics. So what does Knute Rockne do? Kind of like this year is a perfect example. Well, let's get on a train. Let's go to New York and play Army. All right, let's get on a train and go to the other side of the country and play USC. That's what we're going to have to do. That's what we're going to do. We're going to be a national program. I think it might not be like the fiercest rivalry in terms of hatred. You want that, okay, there's SEC ones for you. There's the Michigan-Ohio State thing. But in terms of importance and in terms of history, to me, it's unrivaled.
I will just say before I hand it over to Mark as we wind things down on our show, in 2 years, 2026, and I've told this to you before, Nick, 2026, the 100th anniversary of USC Notre Dame, we need to have double home uniforms. Notre Dame in green, USC in the Cardinal. 2 years from now, we need to make it happen. Like, I know, one wonders if, what if Teddy Hesburgh was around? Like, I'm sure that he'd try to make that happen. I don't know about Notre Dame's current administration, but that's one of the things that I want 2 years from now. We basically get, it'll be a Christmas game. It's Thanksgiving weekend, but it's right before Christmas. The green versus the red. That's something I very desperately want to see on the centennial of this storied college football rivalry.
Well, that's like, I don't know. There's a lot of people that aren't familiar with the history of it and think, Notre Dame and their green jerseys, they've probably done that forever. It's like, okay, they had a spell there in the 50s where that was the regular uniform, but it was done for the big USC game in 1977 that they come out, warm up in blue, go to the locker room, come back out for the actual game, and they're wearing bright green, and they go on and beat the tar out of USC that day. They turn a corner, and Joe Montana, some dorky kid from the middle of Pennsylvania goes and leads that team to a national championship. Not that he ever went on to go do anything else, I don't think. But yeah, like I'm all for it. I love the idea. I remember when you said that a few years ago. I was like, that's if you're ever going to do it between these two teams. Like, I don't know if the blue and the red would blend quite as well, but the pop and green with the cardinal red, that'd be an all-time uniform game.
Got to make it happen. We have to figure out a way to make it happen.
Somebody in the chat, Google, was it Joe Montana?
Joe
Montana.
That sounds right.
Somebody in the chat, Google.
I think he played. He had to play for the Chiefs or something.
The Chiefs. Yeah. All right. Great stuff with Nick Shepkowski. Check out his work there, of course, at Notre Dame SI. Is there anything you'd like to highlight that you've got working this week, Nick?
I mean, game preview stuff, a little bit of rivalry history we're going to get into in the middle of the week. And I guess one more key point, I know, Matt, you asked about it, and then I got into the rivalry part, and I'm passionate about this, so of course I go rambling on. But one more thing for the game, Notre Dame's kicker, Mitch Jeter, was one of the better field goal kickers the last few years at South Carolina. He's been battling a groin injury here the last 2-3 weeks, and he hasn't been the same since it happened. Now, Marcus Freeman was asked about that today after a missed field goal in the Army game the other night from 42 yards. And he's like, yeah, I know he missed it, but he struck the ball the best I've seen him strike a ball in close to a month. It's just something to keep an eye on. If this thing is close, if it comes down to a field goal, if there's an important field goal at some point, look at that for Notre Dame because that is certainly a case where the last month that has been, I wouldn't even say iffy. Iffy would be very generous. And as somebody points out their hip injury. Yeah, he had his groin wrapped for a hip injury the other day. But yeah, it has not looked when like Notre Dame special teams have improved here, especially since that other guy, Brian something, went to LSU. More priorities been put on things with them. The field goal game the last month has not been part of that. It's looked very ugly. And if it comes down to a field goal of significance, then Notre Dame could be in very deep trouble.
Nick, we appreciate you being here. And of course, Notre Dame games have been often blowouts, and they've been able to rest a lot of people, a lot of these players in the fourth quarter. USC, on the other hand, if it plays out the USC narrative, everything's decided by one score. So we shall see how this plays out at the Coliseum.
Something's due to change. I don't know what it's going to be, but something's due to change.
The next chapter in USC and Notre Dame, it's one of those games where all you have to do is see the two helmets and the two color schemes on the field, whether it's at South Bend or at the Coliseum, and it brings back so many memories, and it's just a good feel. If you love college football and maybe you're sick of a lot of things going on with the game these days, but as soon as the players hit the field and you see those colors on the field, you get chills because it is one of the great rivalries in our game. Nick, enjoy the game. Appreciate you stopping by and making this work for us.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invite. Good catching up, guys.
Happy Thanksgiving, Nick.
Thank you. Same to you, Matt. Same to you, Mark.
Thanks, Nick. You too.
Yep.
All right. Awesome. Now, Matt and I would like to announce that we are starting a Big Ten show. So we have had other iterations of the Big Ten live show, but this one will be extra special because Matt will be joining me each and every week. So Matt and I with the Big Ten live show, that will be over on the main channel every Monday in this same time slot at 10 p.m. Eastern time. Tim Prangley anchoring and holding down the fort here on the USC channel. So Matt and I will continue to talk USC. We'll just have 17 other teams to talk about as well on our Monday show. All right, Matt, as always, thank you so much for being here, delivering top-notch analysis on USC. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family.
And to yours.
Thank you so much for that. Want to remind everyone, we've got a college football playoff watch party. It will be fascinating to see where does Indiana slide. What about the three in the SEC that lost over the weekend, but maybe bolstered or supported by all those losses in the Big 12? So fascinating to see what happens and what the committee decides. So join us Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time for the College Football Playoff Watch Party. That's over on the main channel. All right, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone out there, USC fans, Notre Dame fans. We simulcasted on the Notre Dame channel tonight. Again, happy Thanksgiving and have a great football weekend.